My mother was the true heiress of the wealthy Miller family, but she had been kidnapped and trafficked into the remote heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Before her disappearance, she had a life in the city. She was married and had a 2-year-old son. But once she was trapped in those mountains, she was sold to a wretched man in his 60s. That was how I came into the world. When I turned 7, the Miller family finally arrived in the wilderness with the police. My mother broke into heaving sobs as she tightly embraced her firstborn son, Leo, who was now 10 years old. But when her gaze shifted toward me, her only question to the officers was, "Do I have to take this child back with me?" My uncle Marcus and my half-brother, Leo, whom I was meeting for the first time, were visibly repulsed. How could the Miller family ever acknowledge the spawn of such a monster? Marcus spat, his voice trembling with rage. I was paralyzed with terror, my entire body shaking. I reached out, quietly clutching a small corner of my mother's hem, not daring to speak or even look up. Dozens of media cameras were suddenly trained on me. Along with the police and the Millers, a swarm of reporters had descended upon our village. My hand gripped my mother's clothes even tighter as tears welled in my eyes, but I forced myself not to let them fall. The police remained silent for a long time. Finally, one officer spoke with a heavy sigh. "The child's father conspired with human traffickers. He's already been arrested. Legally, you are her only remaining guardian, ma'am." The flicker of hope in my mother's eyes died instantly, replaced by a hollow grayness. She lost control, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "But I don't want her. My life was destroyed for 8 years. Do I have to take her back and spend the rest of my days looking at the reminder of my agony?" As she spoke, her tears fell, not out of love, but out of desperate grief. She reached up to cover her face, but as she moved, she felt me tugging at her shirt. Her eyes, bloodshot and wild, snapped down to mine. In that moment of eye contact, something in her snapped. For the first time, she laid a hand on me, not to comfort, but to shove me away with all her might. Her face was contorted, her voice trembling with loathing. "I don't want you. Don't you understand? Stop following me. If there's no other guardian, then why must you still exist to haunt me? Why do you have to be the one I'm left with?" she choked out, her voice breaking before she could finish. I stumbled backward and fell hard. My head hit the ground with a sickening thud, and my vision went blurry as a dull ringing filled my ears. Above me, a sea of adults, reporters, police, the Millers, all stared down at me with looks ranging from cold scrutiny to utter disgust. An officer stepped forward to help me up and spoke firmly to my mother. "Please, Miss Miller, try to stay calm." Yet, even in his voice, I could hear a trace of pity, not for me, but for her. Marcus, a man dressed in a sharp, expensive suit, stepped forward to defend his sister. Why should she be calm? She was tortured for 8 years. Why can't we just send the brat of that bastard to an orphanage? The law should have some damn compassion. Leo, the handsome 10-year-old boy, clung to our mother's side, his face twisted in anger. "The Millers will never accept a criminal's child," he shouted. Even the reporters began to murmur in agreement. "He's right. A victim shouldn't be forced to take such a child home. It's secondary trauma." I stood there, dazed and helpless. Looking down, I could see my mother's worn-out shoes right next to Leo's clean, expensive sneakers. My head throbbed with pain. I shoved my hands into my pockets, shivering, not daring to take another step toward her. Despite the protests of the family and the press, the law didn't change. The police eventually handed me over to the Millers. My mother refused to look at me again. She took Leo by the hand and climbed into the back of a black SUV. Panicked, I tried to follow, but she slammed the door in my face. Uncle Marcus ignored me as well, reaching for the driver's side door until an officer blocked his path. Marcus let out a cold, hateful laugh. He walked to the rear of the vehicle, popped the trunk, and looked at me with chilling indifference. "Get in," he commanded. To my pathetic heart, this felt like an invitation. Relieved and eager, I ran toward the car. Before climbing in, I carefully took off my dirty shoes, terrified of staining the interior. I had never been in a car before. I curled my small body into the cramped space and looked up at my uncle tentatively. The police officer looked at Marcus with clear disapproval. Marcus just sneered. "What? Is there a law saying a kid can't ride in the trunk?" The officer frowned but said nothing more. Thud. Marcus slammed the lid, and my world turned to pitch black. The journey was long and grueling. The car sped through winding mountain roads, swerving and jolting violently. In the darkness, the world felt like it was spinning upside down. My stomach churned, and a bitter, acidic heat rose in my throat. I pounded on the interior frame. "Mom! Mom, I'm going to be sick. Please let me out." No one answered. My head felt like it was on fire. I kept pounding, my voice weak and desperate. "Please. I don't want to ruin the car." I remembered once, back in the mountains, when I had a high fever and accidentally vomited on the floor. My father had punished me so severely that I spent days in bed, trembling and unable to move. The weight of his anger was a burden I had to carry long after the pain faded. A long time passed before I heard Marcus's muffled voice from the cabin. "If you dare puke in my car, don't even think about stepping foot in the Miller estate." The car didn't slow down. If anything, it went faster, the bumps becoming more violent. I was drenched in sweat, my clothes soaked as if I'd been thrown into a lake. My consciousness began to fade. Eventually, I couldn't hold it back any longer. The sour stench filled the tiny, enclosed space. Panic exploded in my brain. In the darkness, I stripped off my tattered outer jacket and began frantically scrubbing the floor of the trunk. "It's not dirty. I'll make it clean. If it's dirty, I can't stay. I can't be with Mom. I only had her. Even though I knew she never loved me, she was the only one who had ever been there." As I scrubbed, the strain and the nausea became too much. I felt a warm liquid gush from my nose. I tried to reach up to stop the bleeding, but my fingers wouldn't move. In a haze of extreme vertigo, I collapsed and drifted into unconsciousness. I was jolted awake much later by a voice filled with utter loathing. "Get out!" The car had stopped in the courtyard of a massive suburban villa. The trunk was open, and Uncle Marcus stood there, his face livid, staring at me. Leo took one look at me and ran to the side to vomit. "That is so disgusting," he gagged. Though it was night, the courtyard was brightly lit. I finally saw myself. My clothes and the trunk were covered in vomit mixed with blood from my nosebleed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," I stammered in terror. "I'll clean it up, I promise." Marcus narrowed his eyes and turned away. A little girl about my age ran out of the house. She was wearing a beautiful princess dress, her eyes wide and sparkling. She looked like a real princess living in a castle. She ran over and happily grabbed my mother's arm. "Aunt Elena, you're back." My mother stared at her, mesmerized. Marcus explained, "This is Chloe Thompson. She insisted on coming with us to welcome you home. You held her when she was a baby, Elena. You used to say if you ever had a daughter, you hoped she'd be just like her." My mother's eyes reddened as she drifted into thought, watching Chloe. I looked down at my own hands, rough, scarred, and ugly. The little girl hugged my mother's arm and said sweetly, "From now on, I'll be your goddaughter and Leo's little sister." Flanked by Marcus and the little girl, my mother was ushered toward the house. Marcus spoke to her in a tone of tender concern. "We'll stay here for the night since it's close. Once you've rested, we'll head back to New York City. It's over now, Elena. Don't be afraid. Mr. Sterling is flying back tomorrow, He wants to remarry you and put this all behind us." "No," my mother interrupted sharply. Marcus stiffened for a moment, then took her hand comfortingly. She whispered something to him, and he glanced back at me with a look of pure hatred. "Don't worry," he whispered to her. "I'll find a way to get rid of her as soon as possible. There is no place for her in the Miller family." I crawled out of the trunk and watched their retreating figures. A cold autumn wind whipped through the yard. Marcus took off his heavy black overcoat and draped it over my mother's shoulders. I had never seen such a beautiful garment. Back in the mountains, we only wore rags and patches. I had used my only jacket to try and clean the car, so I was left in nothing but a thin, long-sleeved shirt. I shivered, looking down at the ground. Leo, having finished vomiting, looked at me as if I were a diseased monster before scurrying inside. I spent a long time trying to scrub the trunk with my soiled jacket, but the stains wouldn't come out. I wanted to go inside to ask for a towel, but Marcus had locked the door behind them. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see them sitting at a grand dining table. It was covered in more food than I had ever seen in my life. Even through the glass, I imagined I could smell the rich aromas. My stomach cramped painfully, and I swallowed hard. I watched as Marcus placed food onto my mother's plate, and Leo poured her a glass of water. They were talking about something when Marcus suddenly reached out and gently rolled up the sleeve of my mother's arm. Marcus stared intently at Elena's arms. After a long moment, his hands trembled as he wiped his eyes. Beside him, Leo covered his face and began to sob uncontrollably. Both my mother and I had arms covered in scars. Some were from the objects my father used to beat us with when he was drunk. Others were cigarette burns he'd left behind. The rest were from the grueling years of manual labor we spent working the mountain land. As Leo wept, my mother gently blew on his arm to comfort him. Chloe huddled close as well, and Elena pulled both of them into a tight, trembling embrace. I watched them, feeling lost in the memory of the time before I turned 3, back when she used to hold me just like that. She hadn't hugged me since. By the time I snapped out of my daze, they had already left the table and headed upstairs. I watched the maid scrape more than half of the remaining food into a trash bag. My heart ached at the waist, and the gnawing hunger in my stomach grew louder. Once she finished cleaning, she carried the bag outside and tossed it into the large bin in the courtyard. I waited until she went back inside before I hurried over. I stood on my tiptoes, straining to reach into the tall bin. I struggled, nearly falling in head first, until I finally managed to drag the bag out. The rich, savory scent of the food hit me instantly. I brushed aside scraps of paper and debris, frantically grabbing handfuls of food and stuffing them into my mouth. I hadn't eaten all day, and I had already vomited up what little remained in my stomach. Crouching there by the trash bin, I tasted the most delicious meal of my life. I ate until I let out a long hiccup, feeling my shriveled stomach finally round out again. I sat on the ground, rubbing my belly and thinking back to those late nights in the mountains. My mother used to tell me that one day we would run away from that place and escape my father. She said she had a wonderful home and a family that loved her. Sitting there now, finally full, the truth settled in. That home belonged to her. That family was hers. I had no home, and I had no family who loved me. Nothing had changed. A wave of sadness washed over me, and the cold wind made my eyes sting. Suddenly, footsteps sounded behind me. It was Uncle Marcus. I panicked, shoving the bag back into the bin, but I was too slow to wipe the grease from my face or the stray grains of rice from my clothes. Marcus looked down at me, his gaze icy. "Who gave you permission to eat that?" I flinched, my voice trembling as I tried to explain. I saw they were being thrown away. No one wanted them." Marcus's expression darkened. Seeing the scars on Elena's arms seemed to have deepened his hatred for me. "No one wanted them," he echoed coldly. Even if I were feeding a dog, you wouldn't get a share." He was consumed by rage, his hands clenching into fists as if he had finally made a decision. "Get out. The Miller family will not raise you. I'd rather go to jail than let Elena suffer the sight of you for another second." But I had nowhere to go. Back in the mountains, whenever my father called me a worthless brat and kicked me out, no one would take me in for even a single night. Here, in a place I didn't know, I was even more lost. Terror gripped my heart. All I knew was that I couldn't leave. A child on the streets has no food and no shelter. I would die. I thought desperately for a moment, trying to find the only value I possessed. I can work," I blurted out. "I can sweep, do the laundry, I can do anything. Just please, let me have a place to sleep and a little food." Marcus stared at me, clearly unmoved. I gripped my shirt tight. "I can just eat plain rice. 2 bowls a day. No, 1 bowl is enough." He turned to walk away, losing patience. I chased after him, emboldened by sheer desperation. "I can take the hits, too. You can hit me or yell at me as much as you want." That's what my father always said, that my only use as a useless girl was to be a punching bag for him to vent his frustrations. My mother hated me, and now Marcus and Leo hated me too. I figured they needed someone to take their anger out on. It was the only worth I knew. Marcus finally stopped. He turned around, and I instinctively tucked my chin, flinching. I remember the searing pain from when my father hit me with that thick wooden club just days ago. My body screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to stand still, waiting for his hand to fall. But the blow never came. After a long silence, I heard his cold, detached voice. "Don't think you're staying for long. The moment I find a proper way to get rid of you, you're gone." And so, I stayed with the Millers. I followed my mother, Marcus, and Leo to their estate in New York. The house was massive, like a castle out of a storybook. In the living room, there were several photos of a beautiful woman, my mother, playing the piano and painting. Next to them were rows of trophies and medals. In one photo, she held a toddler, Leo, while a man stood beside them, looking down at her with a tender, gentle smile. He was just as handsome as Marcus. I stared at the woman in the photo, and she seemed to smile back at me. Her skin was fair and glowing. She looked more beautiful than the celebrities I used to catch glimpses of on the rare occasion I saw a TV in the village. She looked like my mother, yet she didn't. My mother's skin was sallow and rough, her hands calloused and scarred just like mine. The woman in the photo was nothing like that. I couldn't help but stare a moment too long. Suddenly, I heard my mother's muffled, suppressed sobbing. Marcus barked a few orders at the maid, and within minutes, all the photos were taken away. That evening, the man from the photo arrived. Marcus was with my mother in the dining room while Leo sat on the sofa playing video games. I was in the kitchen, scrubbing the floor, when I heard raised voices from the hall. It was my mother, her voice high and trembling with tears. I peeked out and saw her grab a porcelain bowl, hurling it with all her might at the man's forehead. Blood began to trickle down his face. His eyes went red with emotion as he looked at her with profound sorrow. "Elena, no matter what happened, no matter what you've been through, I am still your husband. And Leo is still our son." My mother tried to strike him again, screaming for him to leave, but Marcus held her back. She shook her head violently, her eyes wild. "No, no. I have nothing to do with you. Get out." Leo burst into tears and threw himself into my mother's arms, sobbing loudly. "Mom, Dad and I have been waiting for you all this time. Please don't drive him away." My mother began to shake more violently, her expression twisting into something unrecognizable. The therapist Marcus had hired rushed forward. "Ms. Miller is extremely unstable right now. Mr. Sterling, I think it's best if you leave for today." David Sterling's eyes were filled with heartbreak. He turned and walked away, his gait unsteady, as if he could barely keep his feet. My mother stood there, her eyes fixed like ice on his retreating back. A single tear traced a path down my mother's cheek before the doctor led her and Uncle Marcus upstairs to rest. I was left alone in the kitchen, peering through the doorway at Leo. He was sobbing so hard he could barely catch his breath. Suddenly, as if struck by a sudden realization, he whirled around and locked eyes with me. I ducked back into the kitchen, dropping to my knees and frantically scrubbing the floor to hide. But he was already there, his footsteps thundering with rage. He snatched the rag from my hand and hurled it into the trash. Then, with a snarl, he shoved me with all his might. My body flew backward, and the side of my head slammed against the sharp edge of the cabinet. My vision swam, and that familiar ringing returned to my ears. Through the haze, I heard Leo's voice, thick with tears but sharp with hatred. "This is all your fault. All of it," he screamed. "Mom loved me and Dad more than anything. Now she won't even look at Dad, and she won't even hold me any more." He closed the distance between us, crouching down with bloodshot eyes. He grabbed me with such aggressive force that I gasped for air, my world spinning. "Why did you have to be born?" he screamed, his voice thick with tears. "Why did you have to ruin everything for the rest of us?" I didn't fight back. I couldn't. Paralyzed by terror and the lack of air, I managed to wheeze out a single broken word, "Sorry." I was always the one at fault. From the moment I was born, everyone had told me so. My father and grandmother in the mountains had cursed me as a worthless girl and a burden. Even the villagers would shake their heads and sigh, saying it was a tragedy I had even been born. My mother used to defend me, occasionally, before I turned 3. But after what happened when I was 3 years old, that protection vanished. From that day on, she only looked at me with cold, absolute resentment. I grew so accustomed to apologizing that it became a reflex, even when I didn't truly understand what I had done wrong. Leo's grip tightened. The nanny, who was clearing the counters nearby, clearly shared his loathing. She looked away, pretending not to see. Just as the world began to turn black and I felt myself slipping away, Leo finally let go. He stood up, his eyes swollen and red. "I hope you rot," he spat before staggering out of the room. Struggling for breath, I whispered another sorry to his retreating back. The nanny led me to a tiny, bare room on the first floor. There was nothing inside, no bed, no blanket, just the cold, hard floor. "The Millers have suffered enough because of people like you," she said coldly. "The floor is more than you deserve." I sat in the corner, my skin feeling grimy and smelling of the day's trauma. I wanted to ask for a shower or a change of clothes, but one look at her frozen expression silenced me. As night fell, I curled into a ball in the corner, shivering. Deep in the night, a fire began to burn in my head. My forehead was scorching hot, and my throat felt like it was being sliced by glass. I crawled toward the door, hoping to find a drop of water, but as I opened it a crack, I heard hushed voices coming from the living room. It was Uncle Marcus and Dr. Evans, the psychologist. "Elena is suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder," Dr. Evans was saying. "We have to take it slow. She must be shielded from any person or thing that reminds her of those years." Marcus's voice was strained with a mix of fury and grief. "We can avoid everything else, but what about that child?" He paused, his tone shifting into a desperate plea. "Doctor, is there any way? Can you issue a diagnosis for Elena? Something that says she has a severe psychiatric illness." There was a long silence before the doctor sighed. "You want to use her mental state as an excuse to prove she is unfit to be a guardian? So you can send the child to an orphanage." "I can't think of any other way," Marcus muttered darkly. My heart climbed into my throat. I stood frozen in the shadows of the doorway, my body turning to ice even as the fever raged. "It's nearly impossible," the doctor continued. "A guardian has to be proven dangerous, showing signs of extreme violence or abuse, before they lose their legal responsibility. No hospital would risk a fraudulent diagnosis like that, Mr. Miller." I heard the sound of something heavy being smashed onto the floor in the living room. I flinched, retreating further into the darkness behind the door. "4 years ago, she tried to escape," Marcus hissed, his voice trembling with a heartbreaking sorrow. "She almost made it. But someone tripped her up. Now, look at her. She was a prodigy. She can't play the piano anymore. She can't paint. Her hands are ruined. Her face. She used to cry if she got a single blemish. Now her skin is like leather. Why, doctor? Why does the law force my sister to raise the child of the man who destroyed her life?" I backed away and silently closed the door, sinking into the total darkness of my room. I finally understood my crime. I was the child of a criminal. My father deserved to die, and because I was his, I deserved to die too. I remembered what the villagers said. My father couldn't find a wife, so my grandmother bought him one from a trafficker. My father and grandmother were no different from the kidnappers themselves. My head and throat felt like they were being consumed by flames. I curled back into my corner, no longer daring to go out for water. Large drops of moisture fell from my face. I couldn't tell if it was sweat or tears. I licked my lips and tasted only salt and bitterness. I stared at where my feet should be, but all I could see was the endless black. My consciousness began to drift, and I thought about what Marcus said. He said Mom tried to escape 4 years ago, but someone had tripped her up. He didn't know that the someone was me. I was 3 years old. My mother had finally found a chance to take me to a small town. She managed to lose my father and grandmother in the crowd. She left me at a storefront, and I watched as she prepared to board a bus that would take her away from that hell forever. But I had chased after her. I ran into the middle of the street and was hit by a car. Blood was everywhere. In my 3-year-old mind, I just didn't want to be left behind. She was the only person who had ever loved me. My mother had one foot on that bus. She turned and saw me, injured, bleeding, and screaming for her. She froze for a heartbeat. Then, she stepped back off the bus. She ran to me and scooped me up, trying to get back to the bus with me in her arms, but it was too late. The bus pulled away. Villagers who knew my father recognized her and grabbed her. My father and grandmother arrived shortly after and dragged us back to the mountains. They locked her away for weeks in a pitch-black shed. I remember pressing my ear to the wooden door, hearing her screams and her weeping. When I tried to kick the door to reach her, my father kicked me so hard in the stomach I couldn't breathe. When that door finally opened again, the mother I knew was gone. She didn't cry anymore. Her eyes were like hollow, dark pits. She became like the other women in the village, working the fields in silence. She never hugged me again. She never comforted me. When I tried to crawl into her bed at night, she would look at me with those cold eyes and whisper, "Why don't you just die?" I felt like I was back in that shed. The fever burned hotter and hotter. I don't know how many days passed, as no one came to check on me. I felt as though a great fire was consuming me, and soon I stopped feeling thirsty. I stopped feeling the pain. My body felt light, as if I were floating. I thought, finally, I'm dying, just like everyone wanted. I must have been unconscious for a long time. But one morning, I felt the warmth of the sun on my face. I opened my eyes to find myself still in that empty, hollow room. I was still alive. A wave of profound sadness hit me. I had failed them again. I had disappointed my mother, my uncle, and my brother by surviving. The door swung open, and the nanny walked in with a dark expression. She placed a glass of water and a bowl of plain rice on the floor in front of me. Her face was full of disgust. "The child of a criminal like you. You should have died in here." But Miss Miller had a moment of weakness and told me to bring this. I looked up at her sharply. Mom sent this." The nanny just glared at me and walked out. I didn't know how long I had been asleep or how long I had been starving. A part of me still wanted to die, but my body wouldn't listen. It had a primal, uncontrollable urge to live. Without thinking, I reached out. I drank every drop of the water and ate every single grain of the rice. The words from the living room continued to echo in my feverish mind, haunting the darkness of my room. "She can't play the piano anymore. She can't paint." My sister's life was destroyed, and yet the law forces the Miller family to raise the child of her tormentor. "I can't think of any other way, doctor. But it's nearly impossible to achieve." I thought of the photos in the hallway, the version of my mother who wore beautiful dresses, whose eyes shone like the sun, who was a gifted artist and a princess in her own right. It felt so incredibly unfair. I was the stain on her life, dirty, ugly, and a constant reminder of the darkness. Uncle Marcus said he couldn't think of a better way, but as I regained a bit of strength from the water and rice, I realized that perhaps I could find one. I crawled out of my room and walked into the living room. Uncle Marcus was sitting with my mother. The moment he heard my footsteps, he turned, his gaze sharp with defensive loathing. Leo was gone. I assumed he had been sent back to his prestigious school. My mother glanced at me, her face turning even paler. She quickly looked away, her hands trembling at her sides. I noticed where her gaze had landed, on the jagged scar on the back of my hand. It was a burn from a time my father had doused me with boiling water in a drunken rage. Looking at me didn't just bring her disgust, it brought her fear. I carried too many of his marks, the scars, and even my eyebrows, which she had told me many times were the spitting image of his. I looked at Marcus. My voice was hoarse from the days of fever. "Can I go to school?" I asked. Marcus's expression was cold. "You expect the Millers to pay for your education? After everything?" "I heard Leo say that the academy has a boarding program," I interrupted quietly. "Even for the elementary grades." "Leo is not your brother," my mother snapped suddenly. Leo was the child born of her true love, the one she cherished. The daughter she wanted was someone like Chloe Thompson, not me. I lowered my head and whispered, "I'm sorry. I understand." After a long silence, Marcus spoke. "Fine. You'll move into the dorms. The Miller family will provide the basic living expenses required by law, but nothing more. Do not expect anything else." It was the best solution for them. They couldn't legally abandon their responsibility, so paying to keep me out of sight was a small price for their peace of mind. I nodded, clutching the hem of my shirt. I was enrolled in the same private academy as Leo, though I was placed in the boarding house. I started the first grade as the oldest and, initially, the most struggling student in the class. Having never attended preschool, everything was foreign to me. On my first day, Leo made a point of stopping by my classroom. The moment he left, my desk mate took a pencil and scribbled all over the cover of my new textbook. He spat on the floor near my feet. "Kidnapper's brat," he hissed. "Stay away from me." Word of my background spread like wildfire. The other children scrambled to distance themselves from me, throwing crumpled paper and snack wrappers at my head. When the teacher finally stepped in to stop them, my desk mate stood up, red-faced with indignation. "Jane's father is a criminal. Leo Miller said that back in the mountains, even the kids helped the kidnappers trick people. Who knows if Jane is going to try and snatch us too?" The other students chimed in. "Yeah, and she smells weird. She makes me dizzy. She's a bad person." My desk mate grabbed his books and marched to the back of the room. I'd rather stand for the whole lesson than sit next to her. One by one, the children around me stood up in protest. Even the teacher remained silent, looking at me with a look that suggested she believed their words. I heard the teacher talking to the principal in the hallway later. "How can we keep a child like that here? Her father is a monster. She's been raised in that environment. It's in her blood." "We have no choice," the principal whispered back. Half of the new science wing was donated by the Miller family. I looked down at my desk, my fingers gripping the edges of my textbook so hard the paper began to curl. I spent the next hour smoothing the pages back down with my palm. Eventually, the teacher moved a single, isolated desk to the far left of her podium. "Jane, you'll sit here from now on." I nodded, packed my bag in silence, and moved to the front. A wad of paper hit me in the back as I sat down. The teacher looked away, pretending not to see, and began her lecture. When the bell rang, a group of boys shouted at me, "Don't you dare look back, Jane. If you look at anyone, we'll tell the police you're trying to scout us for a kidnapping." I gripped the edge of my desk and endured the 10-minute breaks in total isolation. In the evenings, while the other children were picked up by their doting parents in the car line, I walked alone to the boarding house. I was the only first grader who lived on campus. My roommates were 3 older girls, but within a week, their parents had complained so aggressively that the girls were moved out. I ended up living alone in a 4-person dorm. The Millers never visited, but they never missed a payment. So, despite the fact that I occupied an entire room like some kind of freakish hermit, the school kept me there. Eventually, the children in the neighboring rooms were also pulled out by their parents, who no longer wanted their kids living near me. With no one to play with and nowhere to go, I buried myself in my books. I studied every page of my curriculum 1,000 times. By the end of the semester, I ranked first in the grade. When the teacher announced the results and handed me my certificate, her tone was flat. "Jane has the highest marks this term." A chorus of angry voices erupted from the class. "So what? She's still a criminal's kid. Even if she's smart, she'll just use it to be a better crook when she grows up." For the first time, I turned around and whispered, "I would never do that." My former desk mate lunged forward, snatched the certificate out of my hand, and threw it on the floor, stomping on it with his muddy shoes. The teacher frowned, looking as though she found the spectacle distasteful, but she didn't move to punish him. I knelt down to pick up the soiled paper. "It's okay," I told her. Then I looked at the boy. "I really won't. I hate my father too. If children could choose their parents, I would have chosen anyone, literally anyone, else." He spat at my feet in response, and the class erupted in jeers. That afternoon, I sat in my empty dorm room, looking at my reflection in the mirror. I had grown taller. I pushed back my bangs and looked at my eyebrows, the features my mother hated so much. They seemed darker now, more pronounced. I tried to recall the face of that man from the mountains. His eyebrows were thick, unruly, and terrifying. I looked at mine and tried to convince myself they were different, but if my mother said they were the same, then they were. I picked up a pair of safety scissors from my craft kit. I pressed the dull blade against my brow, wondering if I cut them all off, would they grow back in a different shape? Would they come back lighter, thinner? But the scissors were designed for children. They weren't sharp enough. I spent a long time struggling, managed to hack away a few hairs until they looked sparse and uneven. Suddenly, a loud, familiar voice drifted up from the courtyard below. "Jane, get down here." It was Leo. I had been at the academy for 6 months, and in all that time, no one from the Miller family had come to see me. Leo usually sent other kids to bully me, but he never laid eyes on me himself, avoiding me as if I were a plague. My heart hammered against my ribs like a drum. I ran to the window and looked down. He was standing by the large oak tree. "I heard you got first place," he shouted, his voice carrying across the lawn. "Let me see what a first-place certificate looks like." My eyes filled with tears. I remembered when the class representative had won second place. His parents had come to the classroom with a giant teddy bear, and his father had hoisted him high onto his shoulders, laughing with pride. I hadn't been held since I was 3. "Wait. Just a minute," I yelled back, my voice trembling with a desperate, pathetic hope. I ran to my bed, tripping over a broom and nearly falling. I pulled my pillow aside and retrieved the certificate I had hidden there. It still had the muddy footprint on it. I tried to rub it off with my sleeve, but the stain was stubborn. I rushed downstairs, rehearsing a lie in my head. I'd tell him I had accidentally dropped it on the ground. I reached the oak tree, breathless. I hadn't been this close to Leo in months. He had grown taller, and his features were becoming even more like our mother's. Just looking at him felt like seeing a piece of her, and it made my heart soar with a tragic kind of joy. I didn't even realize I had lost a shoe in my haste to get downstairs. I stepped onto the cold grass and, trying to hide my excitement, held the certificate out to him. Here it is." Only then did I notice the group of older boys standing with him. They were likely his classmates. Chloe Thompson was there too, a mocking, superior smile playing on her lips. Leo smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He took the certificate with one hand. Then, slowly, he raised his other hand and gripped the opposite side. With a sharp, casual rip, he tore the paper in half. My heart felt like it had been torn right along with it. I lunged forward, trying to grab the pieces of the only thing I had ever truly earned. My teacher had said that if I studied hard and got good grades, I could earn a lot of money one day and buy my own house. I thought that if no one loved me and no one wanted me, I could at least buy a place where I belonged. That certificate was my future. It was my home. But Leo held the pieces high above his head. I stood on my tiptoes, my face flushed and burning, jumping frantically to reach his hand. Though I was a year older than most of my classmates, I was the shortest in the grade, and Leo towered over me. No matter how many times I jumped, I couldn't even touch his fingertips. The group of boys erupted into laughter. Chloe covered her mouth, giggling at the sight. Leo looked down at me from his height, his expression one of cold triumph. Slowly, deliberately, he shredded the certificate into tiny fragments and let them flutter down onto my head like snow. The boys' laughter grew louder. I dropped to my knees, my hands shaking as I tried to gather the scraps, but they were too small, too many. I couldn't put them back together. A thick mist filled my eyes, and the ground blurred beneath me. A wave of profound, agonizing grief crashed over me, a sense of injustice that I knew I wasn't supposed to feel, but I couldn't help it. My hands were trembling too much to pick up any more pieces. I stood up, staring at Leo through the blur of my tears. "Why?" I sobbed. "I moved out. I told you I'd never come back to the Miller house. Why did you have to destroy my certificate?" The laughter from the group suddenly died down. Seeing me break into such a violent, sobbing mess probably scared them. They were afraid a teacher might come to investigate. One by one, they scattered and ran off. Only Leo and Chloe remained. Leo's face was like stone, and Chloe's expression was still twisted with disgust. I couldn't stop crying. The sobs racked my small body, and the pain in my chest felt as though it would never end. I stood there in the grass, finally realizing I had lost a shoe in my haste. I had run to Leo with such foolish, pathetic hope, believing he actually cared about my achievement. I thought, for a fleeting moment, that someone truly wanted to look at my certificate, that someone wanted to look at me. I just wanted to be seen. I just wanted to feel like I existed in someone's eyes. My breath hitched as I sobbed, until Leo leaned in, his gaze freezing me in place. "Mom is bedridden again," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "And it's because you took first place." I looked up at him through my tears, utterly bewildered. As he spoke, the story unfolded. Apparently, when my mother learned of my grades, the nanny had tried to comfort her by saying that a worthless man from the mountains couldn't have possibly provided such smart genes. She had told my mother that I must have inherited her own brilliance. That one comment had shattered her. She had spiraled into another breakdown, screaming, "She didn't inherit anything from me. I don't have a child like that." The excitement and the stress had caused her to collapse. For the past 6 months, her mental state had been a fragile glass thread. The slightest reminder of her trauma was enough to snap it. She had spent 8 years in those mountains numbing herself to survive, but now that she was back in the world, the dam had finally burst. I listened to Leo, the tears still pooling in my eyes, but I couldn't cry anymore. I was always at fault. Now, I learned that even succeeding was a crime. I stared at him blankly before stepping out onto the sidewalk. He started to follow me, but a teacher pulled him back, whispering something in his ear. I caught only a few words. "The Miller girl. Don't bother." I walked along the long, sprawling New York streets for hours. As night fell, the city lights flickered to life. I passed a park where an inflatable castle and a carousel were set up. Children were laughing and playing. I saw my former desk mate there with his mother. Even from a distance, he recognized me. He shrieked something to his friends, and his mother looked at me with a look of pure disgust before pulling him away. His friends threw their half-eaten snacks at me. I kept my head down and hurried across the street. A sharp, deafening horn blast cut through the air. A driver leaned out of his window, his face contorted with rage. "It's a red light, you brat. Where the hell are your parents? Do you have a death wish?" I scrambled back to the curb, but the word parents echoed in my mind. I had no home. I didn't know where to go. The day Uncle Marcus had dropped me off, he had told me the Miller family would deposit my allowance and that I should never come back. He seemed to have forgotten that schools close for the holidays. Or perhaps, after 6 months, he had simply forgotten I existed. I wandered until midnight, clutching the bank card and the small amount of cash Marcus had given me. I saw a sign for a hotel and walked in, but the woman at the front desk shook her head. "A minor can't check in alone, sweetie. Where are your mom and dad?" When she turned to call the police to help me, I slipped out the door and ran. I spent the next few days sleeping in a subway underpass, huddled in a corner to escape the wind. I could buy food, but I couldn't buy a roof over my head. Finally, I decided I had to go back to the Miller estate. I told myself I would just ask Uncle Marcus to help me find a place to stay for the break, and then I would leave and never bother them again. My mother was still sick. Leo said she couldn't see me. I spent the afternoon trying to remember the name of their gated community. By evening, I decided to take a taxi. On the way, I passed a bakery and saw a beautiful pink cake in the window. I counted my cash and went inside to buy it. When I was very small, my mother had told me stories of her life before the mountains. She said that every year on her birthday, she had a massive pink cake, even after she grew up. She was the cherished daughter of the Miller family, with parents and a brother who adored her. I remembered how her eyes would spark in the darkness when she spoke of those cakes. I thought that maybe, if I brought her a pink cake, she might be a little happier. Maybe she wouldn't hate me quite so much. Maybe, just for 1 second, she would look at me without horror. I held the cake box carefully, peering through the plastic window at the inviting pink frosting. I swallowed hard. I had never had a birthday cake. I didn't even know when my own birthday was, or hers. I hailed a taxi, and like the hotel clerk, the driver asked where my parents were. I clutched the ribbons of the cake box and whispered, "They're at home. I'm going back now." By the time I reached the Miller estate, it was pitch black. Several luxury cars were parked in the driveway, and the villa was ablaze with light. It looked like they were hosting guests. I walked up the steps and realized the front door was slightly ajar. I knocked and rang the bell, but no one came. I could hear laughter and music drifting from inside. Taking a deep breath, I slipped off my shoes and stepped into the foyer. In the center of the living room sat another pink cake. This one was massive, with multiple tiers topped with a princess doll and a golden crown. Leo was cheering, shouting about celebrating Chloe Thompson's first official day living with the Millers. A young, wealthy-looking couple stood nearby, beaming with pride. "It's a blessing for Chloe to be your goddaughter," the man said. They looked just like Chloe. They were clearly her parents. I scanned the room, relieved that my mother wasn't there, but desperate to see her. No one noticed me at first. I gathered my courage and called out, my voice trembling, "Uncle Marcus?" Marcus was leaning over the large cake, a lit match in his hand. He was smiling warmly as he told Leo to go fetch Mom and Chloe. But the moment my voice reached him, his smile froze. He turned his head slowly and looked at me. For a few seconds, he didn't seem to recognize the bedraggled girl standing by the door. Then, recognition set in, and his expression turned into something truly terrifying. "You," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "Who gave you permission to come here?" The walls of silence. "Didn't I tell you to stay at the academy?" Uncle Marcus hissed. I clutched the bag containing the pink cake tightly. The box felt incredibly heavy, and yet, compared to the grand multi-tiered masterpiece on the dining table, it looked pathetically small. I couldn't bring myself to hand it to him, nor could I just drop it. A bitter taste filled my throat as I whispered helplessly, "It's winter break. The school said the dorms are closed." Marcus's face contorted with utter impatience. "Then stay at a hotel. I gave you the money, didn't I? There's $100,000 on that card. Jane, did you blow it all already? I told you the Miller family would only cover your basic needs, not some extravagant spending spree." I wanted to explain that the money was still there. It was just that no hotel would allow a child to check in alone. But my uncle was so consumed by his own rage that I couldn't find an opening to speak. He cast a panicked glance toward the stairs, his eyes filled with anxiety. "Enough. I'll have the assistant transfer another 100,000. Just get out of here. Don't let Elena see you." "No, it's not that," I started desperately. "I don't want more money. I just—" Suddenly, my mother's gentle voice drifted down from the landing. "Chloe, sweetie, what are you going to wish for when you blow out the candles?" She was holding Chloe Thompson's hand, followed closely by Mr. Sterling, her former husband, and perhaps her husband once again. As she looked down and unexpectedly locked eyes with me, the tenderness on her face froze instantly. Marcus's voice exploded in my ear, a frantic, hushed roar. "Didn't you hear me? I told you to leave. Go. I'll send whatever amount you want. Just get out." Leo stared at me with loathing, though his own eyes were rimmed with red. A flicker of lost childhood crossed his face. "I just want my old mother back," he whispered. "The teacher said she used to be like a gentle moon, a beautiful sun. Where did you and that man hide her, Jane?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. He looked at me with such profound sorrow it felt like a physical weight. "Give me back my mother," he pleaded, "and I'll tape your certificate back together for you. I'll give it back, okay?" I lowered my gaze, unable to look into his eyes. I watched his clean, expensive sneakers slowly turn and walk away, followed by the hem of Chloe Thompson's beautiful princess dress. By the time I looked up again, they were heading toward the school gates. "I'm sorry," I whispered into the wind. "I was always sorry." I wandered back to the dorms in a daze, but the house mother stopped me at the entrance. "What are you still doing here, Jane? The dorms are closing for the holidays. Everyone has to leave." I had forgotten. The semester was over, and winter break had begun. I scrambled to pack my backpack and walked out into the cold. With no destination in mind, I drifted through the campus like a ghost. At the main gate, the security guard called out to me, "Hey, kid! Which class are you in? Where are your parents?" We're locking the gates." I stared at him blankly before stepping out onto the sidewalk. He started to follow me, but a teacher pulled him back, whispering something in his ear. I caught only a few words. "The Miller girl. Don't bother." I walked along the long, sprawling New York streets for hours. As night fell, the city lights flickered to life. I passed a park where an inflatable castle and a carousel were set up. Children were laughing and playing. I saw my former desk mate there with his mother. Even from a distance, he recognized me. He shrieked something to his friends, and his mother looked at me with a look of pure disgust before pulling him away. His friends threw their half-eaten snacks at me. I kept my head down and hurried across the street. A sharp, deafening horn blast cut through the air. A driver leaned out of his window, his face contorted with rage. "It's a red light, you brat. Where the hell are your parents? Do you have a death wish?" I scrambled back to the curb, but the word parents echoed in my mind. I had no home. I didn't know where to go. The day Uncle Marcus had dropped me off, he had told me the Miller family would deposit my allowance and that I should never come back. He seemed to have forgotten that schools close for the holidays. Or perhaps, after 6 months, he had simply forgotten I existed. I wandered until midnight, clutching the bank card and the small amount of cash Marcus had given me. I saw a sign for a hotel and walked in, but the woman at the front desk shook her head. "A minor can't check in alone, sweetie. Where are your mom and dad?" When she turned to call the police to help me, I slipped out the door and ran. I spent the next few days sleeping in a subway underpass, huddled in a corner to escape the wind. I could buy food, but I couldn't buy a roof over my head. Finally, I decided I had to go back to the Miller estate. I told myself I would just ask Uncle Marcus to help me find a place to stay for the break, and then I would leave and never bother them again. My mother was still sick. Leo said she couldn't see me. I spent the afternoon trying to remember the name of their gated community. By evening, I decided to take a taxi. On the way, I passed a bakery and saw a beautiful pink cake in the window. I counted my cash and went inside to buy it. When I was very small, my mother had told me stories of her life before the mountains. She said that every year on her birthday, she had a massive pink cake, even after she grew up. She was the cherished daughter of the Miller family, with parents and a brother who adored her. I remembered how her eyes would spark in the darkness when she spoke of those cakes. I thought that maybe, if I brought her a pink cake, she might be a little happier. Maybe she wouldn't hate me quite so much. Maybe, just for 1 second, she would look at me without horror. I held the cake box carefully, peering through the plastic window at the inviting pink frosting. I swallowed hard. I had never had a birthday cake. I didn't even know when my own birthday was, or hers. I hailed a taxi, and like the hotel clerk, the driver asked where my parents were. I clutched the ribbons of the cake box and whispered, "They're at home. I'm going back now." By the time I reached the Miller estate, it was pitch black. Several luxury cars were parked in the driveway, and the villa was ablaze with light. It looked like they were hosting guests. I walked up the steps and realized the front door was slightly ajar. I knocked and rang the bell, but no one came. I could hear laughter and music drifting from inside. Taking a deep breath, I slipped off my shoes and stepped into the foyer. In the center of the living room sat another pink cake. This one was massive, with multiple tiers topped with a princess doll and a golden crown. Leo was cheering, shouting about celebrating Chloe Thompson's first official day living with the Millers. A young, wealthy-looking couple stood nearby, beaming with pride. "It's a blessing for Chloe to be your goddaughter," the man said. They looked just like Chloe. They were clearly her parents. I scanned the room, relieved that my mother wasn't there but desperate to see her. No one noticed me at first. I gathered my courage and called out, my voice trembling, "Uncle Marcus?" Marcus was leaning over the large cake, a lit match in his hand. He was smiling warmly as he told Leo to go fetch Mom and Chloe. But the moment my voice reached him, his smile froze. He turned his head slowly and looked at me. For a few seconds, he didn't seem to recognize the bedraggled girl standing by the door. Then, recognition set in, and his expression turned into something truly terrifying. "You," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "Who gave you permission to come here?" The walls of silence. "Didn't I tell you to stay at the academy?" Uncle Marcus hissed. I clutched the bag containing the pink cake tightly. The box felt incredibly heavy, and yet, compared to the grand multi-tiered masterpiece on the dining table, it looked pathetically small. I couldn't bring myself to hand it to him, nor could I just drop it. A bitter taste filled my throat as I whispered helplessly, "It's winter break. The school said the dorms are closed." Marcus's face contorted with utter impatience. "Then stay at a hotel. I gave you the money, didn't I? There's $100,000 on that card. Jane, did you blow it all already? I told you the Miller family would only cover your basic needs, not some extravagant spending spree." I wanted to explain that the money was still there. It was just that no hotel would allow a child to check in alone. But my uncle was so consumed by his own rage that I couldn't find an opening to speak. He cast a panicked glance toward the stairs, his eyes filled with anxiety. "Enough. I'll have the assistant transfer another 100,000. Just get out of here. Don't let Elena see you." "No, it's not that," I started desperately. "I don't want more money. I just—" Suddenly, my mother's gentle voice drifted down from the landing. "Chloe, sweetie, what are you going to wish for when you blow out the candles?" She was holding Chloe Thompson's hand, followed closely by Mr. Sterling, her former husband, and perhaps her husband once again. As she looked down and unexpectedly locked eyes with me, the tenderness on her face froze instantly. Marcus's voice exploded in my ear, a frantic, hushed roar. "Didn't you hear me? I told you to leave. Go. I'll send whatever amount you want. Just get out." Leo and the young couple, Chloe's parents, all turned to look at me with expressions of deep disgust and irritation. My face and ears began to burn with a scorching heat. I felt a sense of utter humiliation. Even though I still had nowhere to go tonight, I couldn't bear to stay a second longer. Clutching the heavy cake, I turned to flee, unable to say another word. "Wait," my mother called out. "Stop right there." I wasn't sure if she was speaking to me, but I froze, not daring to look back. I heard her footsteps descending the stairs and walking toward me. Her voice sounded raspy and exhausted. "I'll take her. I'll find her a place to stay." She seemed to understand exactly why I had come. I had been her daughter for 7 years. She might hate and resent me, but she was the only person in the world who truly knew me. "No, Elena," Marcus interjected, his voice tight with worry. "Let the nanny handle it. You shouldn't be dealing with this." "It's fine," my mother said calmly. "I feel strong enough today." She walked past me toward the door. Marcus called for a driver, and soon I was sitting in the back of a luxury SUV next to my mother. She sat on the far left by the window, and I pressed myself against the right side, trying to maintain the greatest possible distance between us. Mom always said I was a walking shadow of that man from the mountains. My classmates said I carried the stench of a kidnapper. I hoped that by staying far away, I could make her feel less repulsed. As the trees blurred past the window, I heard her speak to the driver. "Find an apartment near the academy for her to stay in." I looked down at the cake in my lap. I didn't expect her to look at me. I assumed she was personally seeing me out for the same reason Marcus had driven me to school months ago. They just wanted to make absolutely certain I was gone and wouldn't come back. But then, my mother turned her head toward me. I was jolted by a wave of nervous shock. Feeling her gaze, I tucked my chin even lower, curling my toes inside my shoe. After a long silence, she spoke. "Is the cake for yourself?" My hand clutched the ribbons of the box, trembling. It had been so long since I'd heard her speak in such a level, almost gentle tone, reminiscent of the days before she hated me. I gathered every ounce of my courage and whispered, "No. I wanted to give it to you, Mom." Silence followed. My body was rigid, my palms and back drenched in cold sweat. I expected her to snap, to become hysterical, to ask me why I didn't just die. But instead, she said softly, "It's a very pretty cake." She reached out and took the box from me. I looked up at her, my eyes swimming with tears. I bit my lip hard to keep from shaking, looking at the woman who had once held me so tightly. I felt a sudden, massive surge of hope. I reached up and pushed back my bangs. I cut my eyebrows," I said, my voice straining to remain steady. "I don't think I look like him as much anymore. And the scars on my arms. I tried to pick them off, too. But they just bled and came back larger. But look, Mom, my eyebrows are different now." My mother froze, staring at me with a look of stunned sorrow. I saw her eyes turn red. A voice in my head was screaming, pleading for her to tell me that I was right, that I didn't look like him anymore. But the words never came. After a long moment, she looked away, staring out at the passing city lights. "Don't do that again," she said quietly. "You'll only hurt yourself." The hope that had lifted me up suddenly crashed back to the earth. I realized then that no matter how much I cut away, the image of that man would always remain in her eyes. My mother rented an apartment for me and paid 10 years of rent in advance. She hired a nanny and paid her a generous salary to ensure I was cared for until I reached adulthood. She set up a trust for my education and living expenses. After she finished arranging the apartment, she sat with me on the sofa and opened the pink cake. She cut 2 slices, one for me, one for her. She took a bite and looked at me. "It's very sweet," she said. "Eat some." My hand shook as I took a forkful. The sweet cream melted on my tongue. So, this was what cake tasted like. It was incredible. "Yes," I nodded vigorously. "It's very sweet." We ate in silence. I found myself wishing the cake was larger, that it would last forever so I could stay in this moment with her just a little longer. It was the sweetest thing I had ever known, and not just because of the sugar. I tried to eat as slowly as possible, but eventually my plate was empty. My mother set her plate down and looked at me, her voice calm and final. "The rent is paid. The nanny is taken care of. There will be enough money for you to finish school. But Jane, after today, do not come back to the Miller estate. And do not come looking for me." The sweet aftertaste in my mouth turned to ash. After a long while, I nodded slowly. "I understand." My mother took a sharp breath and covered her face with her hands for a moment. "Jane, I am sorry. I cannot bring myself to accept you." I stared at the remaining smear of frosting on my plate and shook my head. "You don't have to be sorry, Mom." I had heard the stories from the people in the mountains. I knew that after my grandmother bought her, she had been tied up. I knew she had tried many times to end the pregnancy, but they had guarded her day and night, certain I was a boy. When I was born and they realized I was a useless girl, they were ready to give up on me on the river, to discard my very life before it had even truly begun. They saw me as a mistake that needed to be erased. And yet, the mother who had wanted me gone while I was in her womb was the same woman who had fought to save my life after I was born. She was the only person who had ever loved me, even if that love had withered away. She wasn't the one who had committed a crime. She wasn't the one who owed an apology. "The nanny will be here soon," she said, standing up. "She'll look after you." She walked out of the apartment, closing the door so softly it made no sound at all. I stared at the cake on the coffee table. It was a small cake. We had only eaten 2 slices, and more than half of it was left. I realized then that she was probably saving her appetite to go back and eat that massive, multi-tiered cake with Leo and Chloe. From that day on, I lived a life of total solitude. I sat alone in the corner of my classroom. I lived alone in my dorm room during the week. I returned to an empty apartment during the holidays. Sometimes the nanny would cook a meal for me, but she never spoke a word. Her face was always a mask of indifference. I wondered for a long time if she was a mute, until I overheard her talking on the phone in the kitchen. She simply didn't want to speak to me. I spent 4 years in elementary school, skipping 2 grades along the way. My classmates changed, and eventually, the bullies grew bored of me and moved on to other targets. The only time my name was ever called was when the teacher announced I had won first place on an exam. Sometimes, I felt like I was forgetting my own name. My life was a series of 4 walls that kept the world out. By the time I reached the 4th grade, even Leo had stopped sending people to harass me. On the rare occasions I saw him, I noticed he was growing tall and becoming more reserved. He was in the 6th grade now, and I would watch from a distance as he played basketball on the court with the other boys, a world away from the girl who lived in the silence. The ghost in the mirror. As I passed by the basketball court, the first person to run over and hand Leo a bottle of water was Chloe. Our eyes met briefly as I walked away. His gaze was cold and indifferent. The burning hatred of our childhood had been replaced by a flat, empty look. To him, I was no longer a monster. I was simply a stranger. I hurried past him, my palms slick with cold sweat. By the time I entered middle school, Leo and I attended different academies. The thin thread that had connected me to the Miller family was finally severed. There were no more awkward encounters and no more visits from Uncle Marcus. It was during biology class that I began to truly understand the science of my existence. I realized that my connection to that man in the mountains wasn't just in my eyebrows or my scars. It was written into the very marrow of my bones, in the 50% of my DNA that belonged to him. It wasn't something I could cut away with scissors or scrub off with a rag. No matter what I did, his shadow would always be part of me. I continued to live my life in total isolation, eventually getting accepted into the most prestigious high school in New York City. There, almost no one knew my history. Those who did had grown tired of whispering about it. I wasn't bullied anymore, but I didn't have friends, either. I was a ghost in the hallways, existing only through my studies. I remained at the top of every class. During the award ceremonies, the room would erupt in cheers and whistles whenever a student's name was called. But when the teacher called my name, the auditorium would fall into a heavy, awkward silence. Once, sensing the tension, a teacher made a point to say, "Let's give a big round of applause for Jane Miller." The students began to clap, but it was a rhythmic, forced sound that felt more like a judgment than a celebration. In the 2nd semester of my sophomore year, during a rare free period in the heat of early summer, I stayed behind in the classroom to work on a math packet. Wendy, our class representative, walked in, her face ghostly pale. She slumped into her seat, letting out sharp, pained gasps. I looked over and saw large beads of sweat rolling down her forehead. I wanted to ask if she needed help, but the words stuck in my throat. I assumed she would recoil at the offer. But when she tried to stand up to go to the nurse's office and stumbled against her desk, I couldn't stay silent. I gripped my pen and managed to whisper, Do you want me to help you?" She looked at me with an expression of pure shock, as if I had said something impossible. My heart sank, and I prepared to look away and pretend I hadn't spoken. "Would you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I dropped my pen and walked over. I gripped her arm through her sleeve and led her out of the room. She whispered that she was having severe menstrual cramps. As we navigated the stairs, her weight began to lean more heavily on my shoulder. I had grown taller over the years, but I was still painfully thin. By the time we reached the tree-lined path to the clinic, I felt like I was going to buckle under her weight. A few boys with basketballs were walking toward us. Desperate, I called out, Could someone please give us a hand?" One of the boys stopped and turned toward me. My breath hitched as I looked into a face that was hauntingly familiar. It was Leo. I hadn't seen him since elementary school. He had changed significantly. He was well over 6 feet tall now, leaner, and his skin was fair and clear. The boyishness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. I hadn't realized he had transferred to this school for his senior year. I instantly regretted calling out to him. I was terrified that my classmates would see his disgust for me, or worse, that they would hear the truth of my past from his lips. I bit my lip and looked at the ground, trying to summon the strength to carry Wendy myself. But without a word, Leo dropped his basketball into the bushes and stepped forward. He reached out and supported Wendy's other arm. My palms were drenched in sweat as I walked in silence, waiting for the mockery or the insults, but he said nothing until we had safely delivered Wendy to the nurse. As the nurse started Wendy on an 4, I stepped out to get her some water. Leo was leaving at the same time. With no one else around, I whispered, "Thank you." He paused, looking down at me, and then his gaze dropped to my hand. The scars were still there, zigzagging across my thin, bony wrists. I instinctively pulled my sleeve down. I expected a sneer, but his voice was merely awkward and stiff. Is there still enough money on your card?" A lump formed in my throat. I forced myself to nod. "Yes. There's plenty. I couldn't spend it all if I tried." "Oh," he muttered. We stood there for a moment longer before he turned and walked away. After that day, Wendy began to seek me out. "I honestly thought you'd never talk to me, even if I died in that classroom," she told me once. "Everyone thinks you're so brilliant and high-cold that they're actually a little intimidated by you." Intimidated. I couldn't believe she used that word. My entire life, I assumed everyone naturally loathed me, but it turned out they just saw me as a distant, untouchable genius. Wendy became my first friend. She would brag to everyone that the smartest girl in school only hung out with her. One day, I gathered the courage to tell her about my past. She was stunned, but then she pulled me into a hug. "That's a tragic story, Jane. But you're brilliant. Everything is going to be okay for you now." It was the first time anyone had looked at me with pity instead of disgust. Slowly, the 4 walls I had built around myself began to crumble. Other classmates started asking me for help with their homework, and I answered them carefully, hiding my trembling hands. That winter, Uncle Marcus and my mother came to the school to pick up Leo for the break. As fate would have it, they walked right past the path to my dormitory while I was heading out to get hot water. My mother was with Mr. Sterling. They were walking close together. They had clearly remarried. She looked healthy and beautiful again, her skin fair and radiant, just like the woman in the old photographs. Even Uncle Marcus had a relaxed, happy smile on his face. I lowered my head, trying to vanish into the crowd of students, but from a distance, I heard her voice. "Jane." I froze, clutching my thermos, and looked at them. My face burned, and my heart hammered against my ribs. My mother walked closer, reaching out as if she wanted to touch my arm, but years of distance made the gesture awkward. She pulled her hand back and tucked it into her coat pocket. "Have you been well all these years?" she asked softly. I nodded, fighting back the stinging in my eyes. "I've been very well. Don't worry about me." As I grew older, I understood the magnitude of the trauma she had endured. I understood why she couldn't be a mother to me. Her face twitched with emotion, and she looked away, her eyes glistening. Uncle Marcus stepped forward, looking a bit uncomfortable. "You've gotten very thin," he noted. "I put another 10,000 in your account. Make sure you eat. And you can always call if you need anything. You understand?" He pressed a business card into my hand. I nodded again and whispered a thank you. Then they were gone. I stood there for a long time, watching their retreating figures as the wind rattled the thin leaves of the locust trees. I looked down and saw my long, solitary shadow stretching across the pavement. I finished high school and went to college to study fashion design. In high school, my art teacher had told me I had a natural gift for drawing and suggested I become a professional artist. It was strange. I had spent nearly all my time in elementary and middle school focused on academics, with almost no time for art. And yet, it was the one thing that came to me as naturally as breathing. I had intended to pursue painting after graduation, until one night in my dorm room, I remembered those photographs in the Miller living room. I saw the image of my mother in her white dress, standing before a canvas. Now that she had recovered, she had taken up her brushes again. And I remembered what Leo had told me years ago, the words my mother had screamed in her hysteria. She couldn't have inherited anything from me. I stayed awake all night, thinking about that. Regardless of her denial, the gift was there, flowing through the same blood she shared with me. The scars of harvest. I ultimately chose to erase any hope of becoming a fine art student from my mind. I didn't want to be another reminder of the talent my mother thought was hers alone. Instead, I went to college and, after graduation, joined a fashion house as a designer. Wendy, my only friend since our academy days, attended the same university, and we remained inseparable. Toward the end of my first year, our department's performance was struggling. My supervisor, Mr. Zhao, a man whose reputation for wandering hands was well known among the female staff, claimed he had secured a meeting with the CEO of a massive conglomerate. He insisted that even a small contract from a man of that stature would carry our department for the rest of the year. Despite my discomfort, he was adamant that as a new designer, I had to cooperate with the team's needs. I followed him into a private dining suite, only to find Leo Miller sitting there, his face like a mask of ice. He was with a foreign business associate, and they seemed to have just finished signing a contract. As the associate gathered his files and left, only Leo remained. Mr. Zhao practically tripped over himself to get close. "Mr. Miller, what a coincidence! We met at the gala last year, remember?" Leo looked at him with utter confusion. "Who the hell are you?" Before Zhao could answer, Leo's eyes shifted to me, standing in the doorway, and he froze. Zhao, completely misreading the situation, grabbed me by the waist and pulled me closer in a suggestive manner, trying to push me toward the seat next to Leo. "I heard you enjoy a good drink, Mr. Miller. My associate here is quite the enthusiast. She'd be delighted to keep you company." I felt a surge of indignation and reached out to push Zhao away, but Leo beat me to it. He didn't say a word as he stood up, grabbed a wine glass from the table, and smashed it directly against Zhao's forehead. "What do you think you're doing?" Leo roared. The glass shattered with a deafening crack, and red wine sprayed everywhere. Leo's face was dark with fury as he turned his anger on me. "Jane, are you a ghost? Are you dead inside? Why didn't you stop him?" In that moment, I saw the shadow of the young boy from the academy. I ducked my head, my vision blurring with hot tears. The next day, I learned that Mr. Zhao had been summarily fired. Aside from that, life returned to its quiet, grueling routine. I worked day and night, pouring my soul into my sketches. A year later, I was headhunted by a world-renowned fashion brand. After several years of relentless hard work, I was promoted to creative director. My salary grew, and for the first time in my life, I had actual savings. I looked at the bank card Uncle Marcus had given me so many years ago. I had only used a tiny fraction of it for my education. I used my own savings to replace what I had spent, intending to return it to the Millers. But then I realized that the amount was likely insignificant to them. Perhaps they felt more at peace knowing I had accepted their charity. After much thought, I didn't return it. Instead, I donated the entire balance to a foundation that helped women and children escape domestic abuse and trafficking. When Wendy found out, she sighed in exasperation. "Jane, you make a great salary, and you had all that money in the bank. Yet you still rent the cheapest apartment in the city and donate everything else. What is going on in that head of yours? I don't feel like I deserve to spend it, I said quietly. Wendy couldn't understand. The Millers gave it to you, and you earned the rest yourself. Why on earth wouldn't you deserve it? I shook my head. I don't know. I just feel like there's always something wrong with me. Like I'm at fault. Like I'm guilty. No matter how hard I worked or how many people I helped, I couldn't shake the feeling that my birth had been a crime. My existence had trapped my mother for years. I was the reason her first escape failed. I was the dark cloud that would never truly leave the Miller family. Even Chloe Thompson, who my mother had tried to raise as a surrogate daughter, had eventually been sent back to her own parents. Some wounds simply never heal. Wendy said nothing, but she reached out and pulled me into a silent hug. I got married when I was 27. My husband was a kind, reliable university professor. We kept the wedding simple. I had no family to invite, and he only had his elderly grandmother. On the evening of our small reception, a black car pulled up to the venue. I was still in my gown when I hurried out to the sidewalk. My mother was standing there in the orange glow of the sunset. Her eyes were rimmed with red. I thought about it for a long time, she said, her voice trembling. And I decided I had to come see you. Marcus and Leo were standing by the car a short distance away, their expressions uncharacteristically soft. My mother took out a small velvet box and handed it to me. Inside was a pair of matching necklaces. I bought these at an auction, she whispered. The theme was 2 hearts as one. I thought they would be perfect for you and your husband. I hesitated, knowing they were likely worth a fortune. But she pressed the box into my palm. I didn't know what to say. After a long silence, I whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." Suddenly, my mother reached out and took my hand. Her voice broke into a sob. "Jane, happy wedding day. Your mother. I have owed you so much for so many years." My own eyes filled with tears, and the lump in my throat made it hard to breathe. I shook my head. "No. You don't owe me anything. You were never in the wrong. You don't owe anyone an apology." Tears streamed down her face. Could you call me that, just once more?" I lowered my gaze, still feeling a trace of the old fear, the old unworthiness. "Mom," I whispered. She lunged forward and pulled me into a tight, desperate embrace. I heard her voice, shaking with emotion. "My Jane, the daughter I brought into this world. You're a good child. You're such a good girl." My tears fell silently, disappearing into the dry, autumn leaves at our feet. I hoped no one saw me cry. It was strange. After all these years, as I leaned against her shoulder, I could still smell that faint, familiar scent. It was a scent I couldn't name, but it was the only thing in the world that made me feel truly safe. "Seeing you like this, seeing you happy and recovered," I whispered into her shoulder, "it makes me more joyful than I can say." She held me even tighter. "Be happy, Jane," she said softly. "Promise me you won't look back at the past anymore." I nodded vigorously. "I promise." She finally let me go, and I walked her back to the car. Leo opened the door for her, then turned to me with his usual stoic expression. "If you ever run into trouble, call us," he muttered, looking slightly uncomfortable. "It's not like we're actually going to ignore you." I smiled through the blur of my vision and nodded. "I know." I watched the car drive away until it disappeared into the city traffic. The last light of the sunset faded, giving way to the dark. But I knew that after the night, the sun would rise again.